All right, joining us now, Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican who serves on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, welcome back. Let's start with this conversation about U.S. boots on the ground. You heard Admiral Kirby say not ruling anything in or out, but you've called for special operators to go in.
We have specially trained warriors in the Army and the Navy whose main mission is to rescue American hostages wherever they may be. Of course, those decisions have to be made based on the intelligence and the facts on the ground, but it should never be ruled out that American soldiers will save American lives. This is the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, but it's also one of the worst terrorist attacks on the American people in recent times as well. We now have 29 Americans killed, and at latest reporting, 14 who are unaccounted for. So if there is an opportunity for America's elite warriors to save American citizens, that's the responsibility of our government. It's not the responsibility of the government of Israel.
So we're all now still trying to make sense of this. I don't think we can. Hamas operates in a way that, well, I don't know if this is just about sheer terror, if it was just trying to take Jewish lives or what it was. But there's one opinion piece over the New York Times has this theory, perhaps because Hamas knew that Israel would then respond by inflicting even more suffering on Gazans in ways that would make Hamas more popular. Do you worry that what's happening now will lend credence to the argument that Hamas makes to disaffected young people, that Israel is the oppressor, that it needs to be wiped out?
No, Shannon. Hamas has dedicated the destruction of Israel as a nation and the death of the Jewish people. That's in their charter. Israel has inflicted no suffering on Gaza. Hamas is responsible for the suffering in Gaza. They've been in charge there for 16 years. They didn't have to spend the billions of dollars they get from countries like Iran on things like tunnels and missiles. They could have spent it on water and power plants. Hamas is their sole responsibility for any suffering the people of Gaza have already had, or for any civilian casualties in Gaza, because Hamas intentionally uses women and children and the elderly for human shields. And if you don't want your hospitals or your schools or your mosque bombed, you shouldn't use them for military purposes.
But you know the images that we're going to get. They're going to say this is Israel. They are carpet bombing and blanketing the Gaza Strip in a way that leaves, first of all, food and water cut off, a humanitarian crisis and destruction there.
Shannon, as far as I'm concerned, Israel can bounce the rubble in Gaza. Anything that happens in Gaza is the responsibility of Hamas. Hamas killed women and children in Israel last weekend. If women and children die in Gaza, it will be because Hamas is using them as human shields, because they're not currently allowing them to evacuate, as Israel has asked them to do so. Gaza is the responsibility of Hamas. And if Hamas uses schools and kindergartens and mosques for military purposes, Israel has every right under the laws of war to strike back. And it is Hamas that's committing war crimes by using those civilians to create the imagery to try to put pressure on the Biden administration, to cave, to not do what President Biden says he's going to do in Ukraine, which is to back them for as long as it takes. If we can back Ukraine for as long as it takes, surely we can back Israel for as long as it takes.
So I want to talk about this issue of Iran. Obviously, they have supported these groups. Whether there's a direct link here or not, the administration's still not willing to say. But one of your colleagues in the Senate had this to say earlier in the week about us potentially going directly after Iran. Here's Senator Graham.
If you escalate the war by urging Hezbollah to attack Israel in the north, if Hamas kills one American and Israeli hostage, we're going to blow up your oil refineries and put you out of business. It is now time to take the war to the Ayatollah's backyard.
Do you agree? Do you think that's an unnecessary provocation that could turn this into a regional or even world war?
Well, first off, it's the Obama-Biden policy that has emboldened Iran now going back more than a decade, giving them hundreds of billions of dollars in sanctions relief. And I have to say the arguments from John Kirby now are so unpersuasive and so disingenuous to be offered only in bad faith. Everybody knows that Iran got $6 billion in ransom. And as you said, Shannon, that $6 billion freed up $6 billion that otherwise would have gone to other purposes. They got $10 billion of payments through Iraq that this administration approved. They got over $40 billion of relief in just refusal to enforce to the max the oil sanctions on Iran. So this administration has emboldened Iran time and time again. Now, the immediate objective has to be the recovery of American and Israeli citizens, if we can find those hostages, and then the total destruction of Hamas. Not just as a terror group, but as a governing entity and a social movement. Now, if Iran tries to escalate but either directly or using Hezbollah, they need to understand that severe consequences will follow, not just from Israel, but from the United States as well. Look, Hamas would not exist as a military entity without Iran. Soon Hamas won't exist, and Iran needs to decide if it wants to follow in Hamas's footsteps.
Would those be military responses or consequences from the U.S.?
Nothing should be off the table. And Iran and Hezbollah should understand that we have two carrier strike groups in the region for a reason. And we are not going to sit by and let Iran and its cat's paws like Hamas and Hezbollah try to destroy Israel as a nation. We will strike back forcefully. We will protect our interests. This administration needs to conduct a complete reversal of its Iran policy. Again, John Kirby talked about our responses to attacks on our troops. The Secretary of Defense said under questioning from me earlier this year that Iran has attacked our troops directly or through its proxies more than 80 times. We've only hit back 4 or 5 times. There's little wonder why Iran is so emboldened when this administration is so hesitant to hold it to account.
I want to ask you about former President Trump. This week he took a number of swipes at Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's in the middle of a war now. It raised a lot of eyebrows. People were concerned. When this is a person who's been described as the most pro-Israel president in history, he has a lot of actions and a record to show that. Were you surprised by his take, in the words of calling Hezbollah, quote, very smart, not that he supports them, but giving them any kind of accolades in the middle of this?
Well, he's since said that he stands firmly with Israel and with the prime minister. I understand they've had some personal disagreements, but when you're in the middle of a war, obviously personal disagreements between heads of states pale in comparison to the national interest. I know that President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu have had their differences as well, but he has said that he is going to give unwavering and rock-solid support to the Prime Minister. What concerns me even more is this administration's actions. As I've said, they've been soft on Iran versus President Trump, who was very, very tough on Iran and stood squarely with Israel. And just look more broadly, it wasn't on President Trump's watch that Kabul collapsed in 21. It wasn't on President Trump's watch that Russia invaded Ukraine. It wasn't on President Trump's watch that Iran unleashed its proxy, Hamas, to slaughter Jews in Israel. All these things happened under President Biden because President Biden has been tempting America's enemies with his weakness and his concessions.
Very quickly, I want to ask you about the nomination of Jack Lew to be ambassador to the Senate. Expedite that. Do you have questions, as Senator Cruz and others have had about that nomination?
Absolutely not. Jack Lew is an Iran sympathizer who has no business being our ambassador. It's bad for the United States. It's bad for Israel to have an Iran sympathizer as our ambassador to that country. He helped Iran evade American sanctions, and he lied to Congress about it. He defended the Obama administration's refusal to use our veto at the United Nations in the final days of the Obama administration to protect Israel from anti-Semitic resolutions. I know Democrats are saying that we need to confirm Jack Lew quickly to show our support for Israel. I would say it's the exact opposite. We need to defeat Jack Lew's nomination to show that we have a new approach to Iran.
We will track that on Capitol Hill. Senator, thank you for your time always.
Thank you, Shannon.